Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. This week in The Hague, countries are set to adopt a convention establishing an international claims commission for Ukraine, a historic step toward holding Russia financially accountable for war damages. As frozen Russian assets, reparations, and European support dominate the agenda, World watches how legal and diplomatic efforts intersect with ongoing conflict. Joining us now to discuss it all further is Scott Lucas, Professor of American Studies at University College Dublin. Good to have you back on TVP World. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Sasha.
So this International Claims Commission, I mean, there's about 50 countries involved. This is an interesting concept. This is under the umbrella of the Council of Europe. Explain a little bit why this is so significant right now.
Well, there's a specific significance, Sasha, of course, which is that the full-scale Russian invasion, which is now almost 47 months old, has caused billions of dollars of damage across Ukraine, and that damage continues on a daily basis. For example, through the drone and missile strikes that take place on civilian sites and on energy infrastructure. So the initial assessment that was made by the International Commission was, okay, let's identify the extent of the damage. And then you have a second step, which is the question of accountability. And that is, with Russia causing this damage, do you hold them accountable not only by saying this is the extent of the damage, but in effect, Russia should repay for this, or they should pay Ukraine compensation for what they've inflicted on this. Now, that specific question of the damage links to a wider question of what is to be done if this conflict continues with Russia's frozen assets. There are about 300 billion euros of Russian frozen assets. About 210 billion of those euros are in Europe. And of course, there's an active question before the European Union right now, which is, do you provide a reparations loan drawing from those assets to help finance Ukraine over the next 2 years? Clearly, if there's an international finding of reparations and that reparations should be paid, it bolsters that EU use of the assets for that loan.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot happening at the same time. What's interesting here is, though, if we look at this, there's also something that's built on this called the Register of Damage for Ukraine. That was set up in 2023. There have already been 80,000 claims. What makes this interesting, I think, is that this is happening during wartime. Right? When we're looking at reparations, that usually happens after. This is, so to say, new territory for legal precedents. But I'm wondering, how realistic is this and how enforceable is it?
Well, I think, Sasha, that's a question we've had about a number of legal processes. Consider the International Criminal Court's arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin and for the so-called Children's Rights Commissioner, Maria Lvova-Belova, over the abduction and transfer of Ukrainian children to Russian-occupied territory or to Russia itself. You know, even if you find Putin guilty of this, how do you enforce this judgment against him? And I think at one level, we're in a similar position here. I mean, I don't expect the Kremlin to hold up its hands and say, oh, we're going to pay this international judgment over the damage we've caused. But I think there's 2 points to be made. First of all, as I just mentioned, there is a distinction here, which is there are Russian assets that could be seized to pay for these reparations and to repay these claims. But secondly, there's a principle to be made here. And I think you have really identified the point, Sasha, that it's not a question of waiting until after this invasion ends, however it ends, and then saying maybe we'll hold Russia liable. It's important for accountability that even as Russia maintains its attacks and maintains its propaganda that it is the victim, that an independent legal process establishes exactly the level of responsibility that the Kremlin bears for starting this invasion, indeed, in 2014, and then on a full-scale basis almost 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm. I suppose also an interesting point to make is this same acronym, ICC, as you mentioned, the International Criminal Court. Now, this is only as powerful as the signatories to it. There's still, of course, for the other one missing, the United States, Russia as well. How important and how, let's say, feasible is it that, let's say, the United States would sign up to something like, it's not Council of Europe, but would the United States support something like this without major players involved? How, let's say, how much, let's say, gravitas does it really have?
I mean, it's highly doubtful that the Trump administration will sign on to this. I mean, because let's be honest, there are members of the Trump administration who have carried water for the Kremlin, and those include the two envoys who are meeting with Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky and with European leaders in Berlin today, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. The U.S. has also stood up against other international condemnation of the Russians over their aggression, including in the United Nations. But I think we have to get beyond, at least from a symbolic and political point of view, of saying, oh, well, we have to have the U.S. on board here. As the Trump administration, let's say, challenges not only Ukraine's security, but European security, I think it's important that European nations and others in the international community stand up and say, look, whatever Washington does, that's not going to handcuff us from actually looking for accountability, for transparency, and towards our own security. So I think in a way, the Trump administration's reluctance to condemn Russia or even give mild criticism of it increases the importance that others in the international community step up.
Mm-hmm. Also stepping up, I mean, you mentioned Berlin there. I want to get your thoughts on that. I mean, right now we have also Zelensky in Berlin, and we know that he met the U.S. delegation on Sunday evening. There's supposed to be more talks today. Also many, in fact, 9 European leaders arriving later on tonight in Berlin. What do you get out of this? Are we close to something tangible here? Is this another shuttle diplomacy run photo op, or are we to something concrete?
I mean, I think it's important that the talks are held, but I would be very cautious that this advances us towards a ceasefire for the simple fact that the Kremlin has refused a ceasefire unless it effectively gets Ukraine's surrender. That's a surrender of territory. That's a surrender of sovereignty over its military with strict limits on troop levels and Western aid. And that's a surrender even to the point of saying the Zelensky government has to go. So I don't think the Kremlin is going to accept anything, even if it came out of Berlin. But I think the question here in Berlin is do we get some type of accommodation between Zelensky and the Europeans with these pro-Kremlin U.S. representatives, and they have been pro-Kremlin. And I would identify a couple of key issues because we got very few details out of the talks of more than 5 hours yesterday. First of all, do the Americans continue to insist that Ukraine withdraw from the 22% of the Donetsk region that it holds, a very strategic fortified area, while making no demands for any Russian withdrawal in the areas that it occupies? If the Americans continue to stand on that one-sided enforcement of what they call a demilitarized zone, then I don't think we get any advance. Secondly, I think we had a significant move by Vladimir Zelensky yesterday, who confirmed that Ukraine will not seek membership in NATO, but it will seek meaningful security guarantees from the international community, including the Europeans and the United States. Does Washington accept this? If the Trump administration will provide meaningful security guarantees and not demand compensation for them, this could be a step, if not towards a ceasefire, to actually establishing a line against the Kremlin where it backs off to an extent the ultimatum that it is pressing for Ukraine's surrender.
Mm-hmm. I know we're going to be getting a lot more information over the next sort of 24 hours or so. One quick statement I still want to get from you. The German Chancellor also being very adamant, very strong words over the weekend, the end of Pax Americana for the Europeans. Do you see himself positioning as that new counterbalance, that counterweight to the United States? Is Germany now in a position of leadership at all?
It's not just Germany. It's Europe that has to step up, working together rather than saying you take the lead or you take the lead. What Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, identified is something that I have been saying for some time as a much less significant figure, and that is the Trump administration does not believe in alliance, or at least major figures in the Trump administration do not believe in the U.S.-European alliance that we've had since World War II. That is gone. Now, if those Trump figures, who include the Vice President J.D. Vance, as well as Trump, as well as Jared Witkoff, as well as Steve Witkoff, if they don't believe in the European alliance, what does Europe do? Does it sit there and wring its hands and say, well, that's it, we're no longer protected? Or does it step up economically, politically, and militarily? So I think you have to have a recognition of the issue, and that has been recognized in the past week by the Danish government. It's been recognized by the Finnish President Alexander Stubb. It's been recognized in quieter terms by the French President Emmanuel Macron. Do we have leaders then saying, okay, if we don't believe we can count on the Americans, do we fulfill that pledge for European security, investment in defense production, defense investment, an economic system that can maintain itself despite American pressure, which might come from tariffs, and most importantly, maintaining the principle of defending Ukraine, even if the Trump administration is stepping away from that.
All right. So as someone steps away, Europe must step up. Interesting, as always, analysis there from you. Scott Lucas, thank you so much again. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Sasha, and thank you, viewers.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks here on TVP World, but stay tuned for more news and commentary. Bye-bye.